In the shimmering, glass-walled world of Harrison Industries, a janitor and her daughter were meant to be invisible. Maria polished the boardroom's mahogany tables, and her daughter, Lily, quietly did her homework in the shadows. The company's future hung on $100 million deal, orchestrated by a ruthless CFO who promised a new dawn. But while the powerful men in the room saw only the dazzling charts, Lily, a 10-year-old math prodigy, saw a lie. She spotted a pretending pattern in the complex financial formula, a subtle flaw that would, over time, destroy everything. The CEO was about to sign the company's death warrant, never suspecting that the quiet child in the corner was about to speak the 5 words that would save them all. That's the wrong formula. Before we dive in, if you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. In a tower of silent glass and steel, a little girl's whisper was about to become a roar. Her mother, the janitor, was meant to be invisible in the most important meeting of the year. But her daughter saw something that the most powerful men in the room had all missed. The city of Crestfall glittered below, a sprawling blanket of diamonds tossed on black velvet. From the 50th floor of the Harrison Industries Tower, the world seemed quiet and orderly. Up here, in the boardroom, the air itself felt expensive. It was heavy with the scent of polished mahogany, old leather, and the unspoken pressure of $100 million. Maria adjusted the strap of her worn utility cart, its gentle squeak the only sound that didn't belong. She was a ghost in this world of titans. Her uniform, a crisp but simple blue, was a cloak of invisibility. She moved along the edges of the grand room, her cloth whispering against the vast table, her presence acknowledged by no one. It was her job to erase any trace of human imperfection, a fingerprint on the glass, a stray crumb on the carpet, before the final signatures were placed on the deal that would either save the company or shatter it. Tucked away in a small alcove near the service entrance, sitting on an overturned bucket, was her daughter, Lily. At 10 years old, Lily was a child of shadows and silence. Her world was one of waiting for her mother to finish mopping hallways that echoed with the ghosts of departed executives. She had a worn textbook balanced on her knees and a pencil in her hand. Her dark hair fell over her face, hiding her intense concentration. Tonight was unusual. Mr. Henderson, the CEO's stern but fair chief of staff, had specifically requested Maria for a final, discreet touch-up of the boardroom just before the partners from a European conglomerate arrived. He'd looked past Maria, not at her, and said, "We need the room to be pristine, Maria. Absolutely perfect. You'll stay until the meeting starts, then leave through the service exit. No one should even know you were here." Maria had nodded, her heart sinking. It meant Lily would have to wait with her. The babysitter was for her normal shift, not these sudden, late-night summons. So Lily came along, a small, silent partner in her mother's nightly toil. She knew the rules: stay quiet, stay small, and never, ever touch anything. Lily wasn't reading a storybook. She was working through a high school algebra problem set she'd found online. Numbers were her friends. They were logical and true. Unlike the shifting glances and hushed, sharp-edged words of the adults in this building, numbers never lied. Her pencil scratched faintly on the page, a tiny, industrious sound in the vast, waiting silence. Her mother worked with a quiet grace, her movements economical and sure. Maria loved her daughter with a fierceness that was the engine of her life. Every floor she scrubbed, every trash can she emptied, was a step toward a future where Lily wouldn't have to live in the shadows. She wanted Lily to sit at a table like this one day, not to clean it. She'd glance over at her daughter, a small, fierce smile touching her lips. Lily was brilliant. Her teachers said so, with a tone of surprise that always stung Maria. A janitor's daughter, a prodigy. It seemed to them a contradiction. To Maria, it was just Lily. The heavy doors to the boardroom swung open. Mr. Harrison entered first. Arthur Harrison was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same granite as the building itself. His hair was silver, his shoulders were broad, and his eyes, though tired, missed nothing. He had built this company from a garage startup into a global powerhouse. Now, he looked like a king defending his castle from a siege. He carried the weight of his legacy, and tonight, that weight was crushing. Following him was a younger, sharper man. This was Julian Thorne, the chief financial officer. Thorne moved like a panther, all sleek confidence and predatory grace. His suit was impossibly sharp, his smile a flash of white that never quite reached his eyes. He exuded an aura of modern, ruthless efficiency. He was the architect of this deal, the man who promised a new dawn for Harrison Industries. Thorne never looked at Maria. To him, she was part of the furniture, and furniture does not require acknowledgement. Mr. Harrison, however, paused. He saw Maria, then his eyes flickered to the alcove and saw Lily. A brief, almost imperceptible frown creased his forehead, not of anger, but of something else. Concern, perhaps. "Maria," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I wasn't aware you were still here." Maria's hands froze on her cart. She felt a hot flush of shame. "I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Henderson asked me to make sure everything was perfect. I'm just leaving." "And your daughter?" Harrison's gaze was soft as it rested on Lily. Lily had looked up, her eyes wide like a startled deer. She clutched her textbook to her chest. "I had no one to watch her, sir. She is very quiet." "She will not be a bother," Maria said, her voice barely a whisper. She was terrified. A single complaint could cost her this job, the one that kept a roof over their heads. Thorne let out a quiet, impatient sigh. "Arthur, the delegation from Zurich will be here any minute. Can we deal with domestic matters later?" The word domestic was laced with a fine, sharp contempt. Mr. Harrison held up a hand, his eyes still on the small girl. He gave a slight, weary smile. "It's all right, Maria. Just be gone before they arrive." He then turned, all business again, and strode to the head of the table. Maria grabbed Lily's hand. "Come, mija." Now, her grip was tight with fear. She began to hurry Lily toward the service door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But just as they reached the door, it swung inward. A group of men in dark, severe suits entered, speaking in clipped German. The Zurich delegation had arrived early. Maria and Lily were trapped. There was no way to cross the room to the main hallway without making a scene. Mr. Henderson, the chief of staff, materialized and shot Maria a look of pure fury. He subtly, almost invisibly, pointed back toward the alcove. "Stay there. Don't move. Don't breathe." Maria's blood ran cold. She pulled Lily back into the shadows of the alcove, her body shielding her daughters. They were caught. Now, all they could do was wait and pray to remain invisible. The meeting was starting, and they were prisoners in the room where it all happened. Julian Thorne began his presentation. His voice was smooth, hypnotic. He stood before a massive screen that glowed with charts, graphs, and projections. Numbers flew across the display, billions in revenue, projected growth rates, market synergy. It was a language of power, designed to impress and overwhelm. "And here," Thorne said, pointing to a particularly complex slide, "is the core of the valuation model. It's a proprietary algorithm we've developed, accounting for dynamic amortization and future-proofed asset allocation. It's the key to the entire $100 million synergy we project in the first 3 years." The men from Zurich nodded, their faces grim and unreadable. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his hands steepled, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was staking the company his father had started, the company he had built, on the truth of those numbers. In the alcove, Lily had instinctively shrunk behind her mother, but her eyes were fixed on the screen. She wasn't looking at the dazzling graphics or the big, bold totals. She was looking at the long string of variables and symbols at the bottom of the screen, the formula Thorne was so proud of. It was elegant and complex. It looked like something from one of her advanced textbooks. She saw variables for principal, for interest rates, for time, for compounding periods. But she also saw something else. Something small. Something that felt wrong. She squinted, her mind racing. It was similar to a compound growth problem she had been working on just an hour ago, but with an extra variable, a little delta symbol she didn't recognize, tucked deep inside a nested parenthesis. It seemed to be a kind of discount factor, but its placement in the equation was strange. Instead of reducing the final value in a transparent way, it was woven into the compounding calculation itself. Her brow furrowed. She mouthed the equation to herself, tracing the flow of the calculation. With each compounding period, that little variable would not just reduce the principal. It would subtly alter the base on which the next period's interest was calculated. It was a tiny effect at first, a rounding error. But over time, over hundreds of compounding cycles represented in a long-term contract, the effect would compound. It wouldn't just be an error. It would be a lie, growing larger and larger with every step. A cold knot formed in her stomach. It was like a puzzle where one piece was hammered into the wrong spot. From a distance, the picture looked fine. But up close, you could see the tear, the buckling of the whole structure around that single, flawed piece. The men in the room saw the big picture, the promise of $100 million. They didn't see the tiny crack in the foundation. But Lily did. She tugged gently on her mother's sleeve. Maria was statue still, her eyes fixed forward, praying for the floor to swallow them. She gently squeezed Lily's hand, a signal to be quiet. "Mama," Lily whispered, her voice so soft it was barely a breath. "Sure, mija." Not a sound. Maria breathed back, not looking down. "Mama." "The math," Lily insisted, her whisper a little more urgent. "On the screen. It's wrong." Maria's entire world screeched to a halt. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. She looked down at her daughter. Lily's face was pale, her eyes wide and serious, fixed on the glowing screen. There was no childish fantasy in her gaze. There was only a terrifying certainty. "What are you talking about?" Maria whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Lily, this is not a game. Be quiet." "It's the formula," Lily breathed, pointing a small, trembling finger. "The one for the valuation. He says it shows growth, but it hides something. It makes the debt look smaller over time. It's the wrong formula." Maria stared from her daughter's earnest face to the screen filled with incomprehensible symbols. Julian Thorne was talking about global markets and risk mitigation. The German bankers were starting to nod, a flicker of agreement in their stern expressions. They were being convinced. They were walking towards a cliff and smiling about the view. And her daughter, her quiet, brilliant little girl who lived on the edges of this world, was telling her it was all a lie. Maria was faced with an impossible choice. To stay silent was to obey every rule she had ever been taught, to protect her job, to keep her and her daughter safe in their small, fragile life. To speak was to invite disaster. She was a janitor. Her word meant less than nothing in this room. They would laugh at her. They would fire her. They might even have her arrested for disrupting a meeting of this magnitude. But then she looked into Lily's eyes. She saw the absolute conviction there. She had seen that look before, when Lily had solved a puzzle everyone else had given up on, when she had patiently explained a scientific concept to Maria that she herself had never understood. Lily was never wrong about these things. Her mind saw patterns the way other people saw colors. In that heart-stopping moment, Maria's fear for her job was eclipsed by a different, more powerful fear. The fear of what would happen if her daughter was right. Mr. Harrison had been kind to them, in his own distant way. He was an old-fashioned man, a man of integrity, she'd heard the older employees say. He was about to bet his entire company on a lie. A wave of protectiveness washed over Maria, so fierce it stole her breath. It was not just for her daughter. It was for that tired, decent man at the head of the table. It was for the thousands of other employees, the secretaries, the mailroom clerks, the other cleaners, whose lives depended on the health of this company. Julian Thorne's voice droned on, a smooth, venomous lullaby. "So, as you can see, the financial architecture is flawless. We are ready to sign." He was picking up a pen. The head of the Zurich delegation was reaching for his own. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, a breath that felt like it was drawn from the very center of the earth, she took one step out of the alcove. Just one step. It was the longest journey of her life. She cleared her throat. It was a small sound, a tiny disruption in the cathedral of finance. But it was enough. Every head in the room turned. 20 pairs of powerful, astonished eyes fixed on the janitor. Thorne's face, which had been a mask of triumph, twisted into a snarl of disbelief and fury. The German bankers looked confused, insulted. Mr. Harrison's eyes widened. He stared at Maria, not with anger, but with pure, unadulterated shock. Maria's voice, when it came, was a tremor, but it was clear. "Forgive me, Mr. Harrison," she said, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "I apologize for the interruption. But there is a mistake." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound it felt like the pressure in the room had dropped, like the moment before a lightning strike. A janitor had just spoken. A ghost had just found its voice. And in the heart of that terrifying silence, a 10-year-old girl held the truth in her hands. Julian Thorne was the first to recover. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. "A mistake," he repeated, turning to the other men as if to share a joke. "Arthur, what is the meaning of this? Has the cleaning staff started auditing our financial models?" He turned his cold gaze on Maria. "You have 2 seconds to get out of this room before I have security escort you out of this building for good." Maria flinched, but she stood her ground. Her gaze was locked on Mr. Harrison. She was not speaking to Thorne. She was speaking to the man who owned the company, the man whose legacy was on the line. "Sir," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "It's the formula, the one on the screen." Mr. Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked from Maria's desperate face to the complex equation glowing on the wall. He was a builder, not a financier. He understood concrete and steel, supply chains and labor. He relied on men like Thorne to navigate the treacherous waters of high finance. But he also had an uncanny instinct for people, a gut feeling that had saved him more than once. And right now, his gut was screaming at him. "What about the formula, Maria?" he asked, his voice calm and even, cutting through Thorne's rising anger. "Arthur, this is insane." Thorne snapped, taking a step forward. "We are in the middle of closing a $100 million deal. You cannot possibly be entertaining this nonsense." "Be quiet, Julian," Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave. He didn't shout, but the command had the force of a physical blow. Thorne froze, his mouth snapping shut, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Harrison's attention was fully on Maria now. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the 3 of them: the king, the janitor, and the furious courtier. "Explain," he said simply. Maria's throat was dry. She didn't understand the formula. How could she explain it? She looked back toward the alcove, a silent plea in her eyes. Lily, seeing her mother's distress, took a hesitant step forward, clutching her textbook like a shield. All eyes in the room, baffled and irritated, shifted to the little girl in the simple dress. Mr. Harrison's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Is this your daughter?" Maria nodded, her heart a cold stone in her chest. "Yes, sir. This is Lily." "Lily," Mr. Harrison said, his voice gentle. "Did you see something?" Lily swallowed hard, her small frame trembling under the weight of so many stares. But when she looked at the formula on the screen, a strange sort of calm settled over her. The numbers were her friends. They would not betray her. She pointed with a small, steady finger. "There," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the huge room. "Speak up, child," Harrison encouraged. Lily took a breath. "The variable," she said, her voice a little stronger. "The delta. It's in the wrong place in the compounding term. It's not a simple discount. It's an exponential decay function hidden inside a growth function." A wave of murmurs went through the Zurich delegation. One of the younger men pushed his glasses up his nose and stared intently at the screen. Thorne scoffed, recovering his composure. "Exponential decay? What is this, a high school science fair?" "This is a proprietary valuation metric. It's a stress test variable meant to project resilience in a volatile market. It's far too complex for a child to understand." But Mr. Harrison was watching the younger banker from Zurich, who was now muttering to his superior in rapid German, pointing at the screen. The confidence on the faces of the delegation was beginning to evaporate, replaced by a cautious, professional skepticism. "Lily," Mr. Harrison said, his voice holding a new note of urgency. "Can you explain it to me? Use simple words." Lily looked at her mother, who gave her a tiny, almost invisible nod of encouragement. That was all she needed. She took a few steps forward, standing in the center of the vast carpet, a tiny figure in a forest of giants. "Imagine you have $100, she began, her voice clear and steady. "And you get 10% interest every year. After 1 year, you have $110. Simple." She paused, making sure he was following. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. "Now, the formula on the screen does that," she continued. "But it also has a secret rule. The delta, the little triangle. It says that every year, before you calculate the interest, the bank secretly pretends your money is worth a little bit less. So in year two, they don't calculate 10% of 110. They calculate it on, say, 109. And the next year, it's not based on the new total. It's based on that total, but with another little bit taken away first. She looked at the screen again. It's a very small bit. So for the first few years, you don't notice. The total still goes up, but it's going up slower than you think. And over many years, the difference between what you think you have and what you really have gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The formula is designed to make a decaying asset look like it's still growing strong. It hides a weakness. It tells a lie that gets worse over time. Silence. The simple, clear explanation landed in the room with the force of a thunderclap. Lily had taken a concept buried in complex jargon and laid it bare for everyone to see. She had translated the lie. The head of the Zurich delegation, a stern, older man named Mr. Richter, stood up. He spoke in heavily accented but precise English. Mr. Harrison, my analyst has just confirmed the child's hypothesis. The placement of this stress test variable is highly unorthodox. It systematically undervalues the compounding debt load of the assets in question while inflating the projected revenue stream. Over the 10-year term of this agreement, the discrepancy would not be a rounding error. It would be catastrophic. He looked at Thorne with eyes like chips of ice. This is not a financial model. It is a work of fiction. Julian Thorne's face went white. The mask of smooth confidence shattered, revealing a raw, desperate panic underneath. That's a gross misinterpretation. It's a standard hedge against market fluidity. There is nothing standard about this, Mr. Thorne, Richter said coldly. We are terminating our interest in this negotiation. Effective immediately, he and his delegation began gathering their papers, their movements stiff with anger. They had almost been tricked. Their professional pride was wounded, and their money had been protected by the most unlikely of sources. As they filed out of the room, Mr. Richter paused beside Lily. He looked down at the small girl, who seemed to be trying to shrink into the carpet. He reached into his coat, pulled out a heavy gold pen, and offered it to her. In my country, he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, we reward clarity and truth. You have shown more of both than anyone else in this room today. Thank you. Lily looked at her mother, who was staring in stunned silence. Maria nodded, and Lily shyly took the pen. The delegation left. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Mr. Harrison, a trembling Julian Thorne, and a janitor and her daughter in the wreck of a $100 million deal. The room was still. The only sound was the faint hum of the city outside. Mr. Harrison slowly sat down at the head of the table. He looked old, older than he had just an hour ago. He looked at the glowing screen, at the deceptive formula that had almost cost him everything. Then he looked at Julian Thorne. Julian, he said, and his voice was terrifyingly quiet. You have been my CFO for 8 years. I trusted you. I brought you into my father's house. Arthur, I can explain. Thorne stammered, beads of sweat on his forehead. It's a protective measure. The market is unpredictable. I was trying to build a buffer to protect us. Protect us. Harrison's voice was laced with iron. You built a lie, Julian. You built a time bomb, and you were about to place it in the foundation of this company. A bomb that a 10-year-old child could see. He gestured to an intercom on the table. Henderson, get security up here. Now, Mr. Thorne will be escorted from the premises. He is not to touch his computer. He is not to speak to anyone. His access is revoked. We will conduct a full, forensic audit of every deal he has signed in the past 5 years. Arthur, you can't. Thorne pleaded, his voice cracking. My career, my life. Your career is the least of your concerns right now, Julian. Harrison said, his voice flat and final. You should be thinking about fraud statutes and prison sentences. Now get out of my sight. 2 large security guards entered the room. They flanked Thorne, who seemed to crumple, all the fight gone out of him. He looked like a puppet with its strings cut. As they led him away, his eyes fell on Maria and Lily. It was a look of pure, venomous hatred. A look that promised that this was not over. Maria instinctively pulled Lily behind her, shielding her from the man's toxic glare. And then they were alone. Just the 3 of them in the grand, silent boardroom. The CEO who had just been saved from ruin. The janitor who had risked everything. And the little girl with a gold pen in her hand and the weight of the world in her eyes. Mr. Harrison let out a long, shuddering breath. He ran a hand over his face, the picture of exhaustion. He looked at the 2 of them, standing there by the service door, looking as though they expected to be punished for the chaos they had wrought. He rose from his chair and walked slowly toward them. He was an imposing figure, and Maria couldn't help but flinch, expecting the other shoe to drop. She had saved him, yes, but she had also broken every rule. She had embarrassed him in front of business partners. The cost of her courage, she feared, would still be her job. Harrison stopped in front of them. He didn't look at Maria. He knelt down, so his eyes were level with Lily's. It was a gesture of respect that was so unexpected it made Maria's breath catch in her throat. "Lily," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "What you did tonight. You have any idea what you just did?" Lily shook her head, her eyes wide. She clutched the heavy pen. "You saved more than a deal. You saved this company. You saved the jobs of 3,000 people. You saved, well, you saved me from being the worst kind of fool. The kind who is so blind he can't see the viper in his own house." He looked up at Maria, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the strength in her jaw, the fierce, protective love she had for her daughter. He saw a woman of immense courage. "Maria," he said, his voice filled with a profound, humbling gratitude. "I have been walking past you in these hallways for years. I am ashamed to say I never truly saw you. I am so sorry." Tears welled in Maria's eyes. She had braced herself for anger, for dismissal. She had not been prepared for this. For kindness. For humility. "Sir, you only did the right thing," he finished for her. "When every man I pay millions of dollars to advise me either didn't see it or didn't want to see it, you and your daughter spoke the truth." He stood up, his gaze sweeping around the opulent room. This company, it's built on numbers. We live and die by them. But tonight, I was reminded that integrity, character, that's the real foundation. And it has nothing to do with the floor your office is on." He looked back at them. A new energy seemed to fill him, the weariness replaced by a steely resolve. "Things are going to change around here," he said, more to himself than to them. "Starting now, Maria, you and Lily are not going home yet. If you don't mind, I'd like you to join me in my office. I think we have a great deal more to discuss." As he led them out of the boardroom and down the quiet, carpeted hall toward the corner office, Maria held Lily's hand. The little girl's steps were light, almost skipping, but Maria's felt heavy, as if she were walking in a dream. She had entered this building as a ghost, a servant meant to be unseen. She was leaving the boardroom as something else entirely. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the days of living in the shadows were over. Mr. Harrison's office was nothing like the boardroom. The boardroom was a place of war, cold and impersonal. His office was a place of history, warm and deeply personal. The walls were lined not with abstract art, but with framed black and white photographs of his father and grandfather standing proudly in front of rough-looking construction sites. There were dusty blueprints of the company's first factory under a sheet of glass on a side table. The scent of mahogany was replaced by the faint, comforting smell of old books and brewed coffee. Behind his large, cluttered desk was a wide window that looked out onto the same glittering cityscape, but from here, it felt less like a kingdom to be conquered and more like a community to be protected. "Please," he said, gesturing to two soft leather chairs in front of his desk. "Sit down. Both of you." Maria hesitated. She had cleaned these very chairs 1,000 times, always careful not to disturb the perfect arrangement of papers on the desk. To actually sit in one felt like a transgression. Lily, however, seemed less intimidated. She climbed into the chair, her small feet dangling far above the plush carpet, and looked around with open curiosity. Mr. Harrison walked over to a small refrigerator tucked into a credenza. "Can I get you something? Water? Juice? I think there might even be a chocolate bar in here somewhere." "No. Thank you, sir," Maria said quickly. "We are fine." He ignored her polite refusal and came back with 2 bottles of apple juice and a bar of expensive-looking dark chocolate. He handed the juice to Maria and the chocolate to Lily. "For you," he said to Lily with a small smile. "A consultant's fee." Lily looked at the chocolate, then at her mother. Maria gave a slight nod, and Lily carefully unwrapped a corner of the foil. Mr. Harrison settled into his own chair, not behind the desk, but in another armchair across from them, making the arrangement feel less like an interrogation and more like a conversation. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked at Maria. "Maria," he began, his voice low and serious. "How long have you worked for this company?" 12 years, sir," she answered. "I started a few months after my husband passed away." The information landed quietly in the room. He hadn't known. He hadn't known anything. 12 years, he repeated softly. He looked at Lily, who was taking a small, precise bite of chocolate. "So, she has grown up in these hallways." "Yes, sir. On nights when I cannot find anyone to watch her, she comes with me. She does her homework. She reads. She is always good. She never makes a sound." Maria's voice was filled with a mother's reflexive defense of her child. "She does more than her homework, it seems," Harrison said, a hint of awe in his voice. He turned his attention back to Lily. "That formula, Lily. Where did you learn to read mathematics like that?" "My teacher, Mrs. Davison, gives me extra work," Lily said quietly. "She says my mind needs a bigger playground. So I find problems on the internet. I like the ones about growth, like how a seed becomes a forest or how money grows in a bank. It's all just patterns. How a seed becomes a forest." The simple poetry of it struck Harrison. He had spent his life trying to grow a forest and had almost let a poisoner kill the roots. "And you saw a bad pattern tonight," he said. Lily nodded. "It was a pretending pattern. It pretended to grow, but it was really made to shrink." A heavy silence settled in the office. Mr. Harrison stared at the girl, this child who saw the world in patterns of truth and lies, and felt a profound sense of clarity. For years, he had been surrounded by men who spoke in a language of obfuscation, of plausible deniability, of complex terms designed to conceal rather than reveal. Thorne had been the master of it, and in one simple sentence, this little girl had articulated the truth more effectively than any auditor's report ever could. A pretending pattern. "Maria," he said, his focus shifting back to her. "What you did stepping out of that alcove, that must have been terrifying." Maria looked down at her hands, which were twisting the cap of the juice bottle. "I was afraid I would lose my job." "You risked your livelihood for the truth," Harrison stated. "It wasn't a question. You trusted your daughter over the word of the most powerful men in the room." She is true," Maria said, as if it were the simplest, most obvious fact in the world. "She does not lie. The numbers do not lie. So I knew. I knew." In her world, truth was a compass point. It was fixed and reliable. Harrison felt a pang of shame for the world he had created within these walls, where truth was treated as a commodity to be bought and sold. "I cannot repay what you have done for me tonight," he said, "for this company. But I must try. First, Maria, you will no longer be working the night shift. In fact, your employment with the cleaning contractor is finished as of this moment." Maria's heart plummeted. He was firing her after all. It was a gentle dismissal, but a dismissal nonetheless. She felt the blood drain from her face. Harrison saw the panic in her eyes and immediately raised a hand. No, that's not what I mean. You are finished working for them. As of tomorrow morning, you will be an employee of Harrison Industries. A direct employee." Maria stared at him, confused. I don't understand, sir." "To do what?" "I am creating a new position," he said, the idea taking firm shape in his mind as he spoke. "You will be my special advisor for operational integrity." The title was long and corporate, but the meaning was simple. He saw her confusion and clarified. "Maria, you have something that I have discovered is incredibly rare in this building. You have courage, you have integrity, and you have eyes that see what is really there, not just what people want you to see. For 12 years, you have moved through this building invisibly. You have seen everything. You have heard everything. You know who works late, who is careless, who is dedicated. You have seen the real life of this company from the ground up." He leaned forward, his voice intense. "I don't want you to clean anymore. I want you to watch. I want you to listen. Your job will be to be my eyes and ears. I want you to report directly to me. No one else. I want you to tell me the truth. The kind of truth that doesn't show up on a balance sheet." Maria was speechless. From janitor to advisor to the CEO. It was impossible. It was a dream. "And for you, Lily," he continued, turning to the little girl who was now listening intently, her chocolate forgotten. "This company is going to fund your education. All of it. From today until you have whatever degree you want, from whatever university you choose. We will set up a trust in your name. You will never have to worry about paying for a book or a class ever again. Your playground, as you call it, will be as big as you want it to be." Tears were now streaming freely down Maria's face. They weren't tears of fear or sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming relief that was so immense it felt like a physical weight being lifted from her soul. For 12 years, she had carried the burden of being a single mother, of living paycheck to paycheck, of praying her daughter's brilliant mind would not be held back by their poverty. And now, in one night, in one impossible hour, that burden was gone. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she stammered through her tears. "Say you'll accept," Harrison said gently. "Please. I need you, Maria. This company needs you." Maria looked at Lily, who was beaming, a real, wide, brilliant smile that lit up her whole face. She looked back at Mr. Harrison, at this powerful man who had shown them such unexpected grace. She nodded, unable to speak. "Good," he said, a genuine smile finally breaking through his weary expression. "That's settled then. Now, it is nearly midnight. You can't possibly take the bus home. My driver will take you. Walter." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Walter, could you please come up to my office?" A moment later, the door opened and a kindly, uniformed security guard with a gentle face and a neat white mustache entered. It was Walter, the guard who always saved a cookie for Lily from the cafeteria and asked her what she was learning in school. He saw Maria and Lily sitting in the CEO's chairs, and his eyes widened in surprise. "Walter," Harrison said, "Maria and Lily need a ride home. Please take them in my private car. Ensure they get to their doors safely." "Of course, Mr. Harrison," Walter said, his professional demeanor barely hiding his shock. He gave Maria a warm, questioning look. As Maria and Lily stood up to leave, Mr. Harrison walked with them to the door. "Maria," he said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, "report to my executive assistant, Clara, at 9 a.m. She will have your new office ready." He then knelt down to Lily once more. "And you, young lady, don't ever stop looking for the pretending patterns. The world needs more people like you." "I won't," Lily promised solemnly. The ride home in Mr. Harrison's cavernous black sedan was silent and dreamlike. Walter drove carefully, not asking any questions, though his curiosity was palpable. As they glided through the sleeping city, Maria stared out the window. They passed the bus stops she knew so well, the all-night diners, the familiar landmarks of her long journey home. Tonight, she saw them through a different lens, as if she were a visitor in her own life. When they arrived at their small, modest apartment building, Walter insisted on walking them to their door on the 3rd floor. "Whatever happened up there tonight, Maria," he whispered at the door, "I'm glad. I've never seen the big boss look at anyone the way he looked at you two." Inside their apartment, Maria finally let the full weight of the night wash over her. She hugged Lily so tightly the little girl let out a small squeak. "Mama, you're squeezing me." "Oh, mija," Maria whispered into her hair, her voice choked with emotion. "Do you understand what you did? You changed our lives tonight. You changed everything." Lily hugged her back. "I just didn't want that man to lie to Mr. Harrison. It wasn't nice." In its beautiful simplicity, it was the whole truth. It wasn't about the money or the fame. It was about right and wrong. That night, for the first time in 12 years, Maria slept without the gnawing anxiety about the future. She slept the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who had finally been seen. The next morning, the headquarters of Harrison Industries was a hive of frantic speculation. Julian Thorne's sudden, spectacular exit had left a power vacuum and 1,000 unanswered questions. The rumor mill churned with whispers of a failed deal, of a massive financial miscalculation, of a furious blow-up with the CEO. No one knew the truth. At precisely 9 a.m., Maria walked through the front doors. She was not wearing her blue janitor's uniform. She had spent an hour that morning picking out her nicest dress, a simple but elegant navy blue one she'd worn only to church. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she walked with a newfound, hesitant confidence. The receptionist, a woman who had never given her more than a cursory nod, stared in open-mouthed confusion. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Clara, Mr. Harrison's assistant," Maria said, her voice steady. The woman's confusion deepened, but she dutifully buzzed the executive floor. "There's a Maria here to see you." A moment later, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 50s came out of the elevator. This was Clara, the gatekeeper to Mr. Harrison, a woman known for her fierce efficiency and loyalty. "Maria," she asked, her expression neutral but questioning. Yes, Maria said. Right this way. Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Clara led her through the hushed executive suite to a small but pleasant office right next to Mr. Harrison's own. It had a desk, a computer, and a window with a stunning view of the city park. On the desk was a simple nameplate, Maria Flores, Special Advisor. Mr. Harrison is in an emergency board meeting, Clara explained, her tone softening with a hint of respect. She clearly knew what had happened. He asked me to get you settled. He said your first task is simply to observe. Meanwhile, in the boardroom, Arthur Harrison was facing the fight of his life. He had assembled the board of directors, a collection of grim-faced, wealthy men and women who cared more for the bottom line than for corporate morality. He told them everything. He told them about Thorne's deception, the flawed formula, the aborted deal. And he told them how it was discovered. Let me be clear, a stern-faced director named Bancroft interrupted. You are telling us you scuttled a $100 million deal, a deal that was supposed to be our salvation, based on the mathematical observation of a janitor's 10-year-old child? I am telling you, Harrison countered, his voice like flint, that a 10-year-old child saved this board, and this company, from committing an act of catastrophic fraud. The forensic accountants I brought in this morning have already confirmed it. Thorne's model was a fiction. The deal would have bankrupted us within 5 years. He let that sink in. The audit is just beginning, Harrison continued. But it's already clear that Julian Thorne's corruption runs deep. He has been cooking the books for years, using complex financial products to hide losses and inflate earnings. The company is not as healthy as we believed. We are, in fact, in serious trouble. The mood in the room shifted from skepticism to fear. What are you proposing, Arthur? Asked the director. I am proposing a new way forward, Harrison said, his eyes sweeping across the room. One based on transparency and truth. We are going to clean our own house. Every department, every contract, every balance sheet. And to help me do this, I have appointed a new advisor. He told them about Maria, her history with the company, her new role. Bancroft scoffed. An advisor? A janitor? Arthur, have you lost your mind? What could she possibly offer? She offers a perspective none of us have, Harrison shot back. She has seen this company from a vantage point of invisibility. She is unburdened by ambition or politics. Her only loyalty is to the truth. And right now, that makes her the most valuable person in this entire building. He had won them over for now, but he knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. The battle against Thorne was over, but the war to save the soul of his company had just begun. And his most unlikely general was a quiet, courageous woman who was, at that very moment, staring out her new office window, wondering where in the world she was supposed to begin. Maria's first few days were a strange and disorienting journey through a world she thought she knew. She walked the halls of Harrison Industries, but now she carried a notebook instead of a dust rag. People who had looked through her for years now stared at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and awe. The whispers followed her down the hallways. That's her. The janitor. The one who got Thorne fired. She started where she was most comfortable, in the quiet hours of the early morning and late night. She spoke to the security guards on the graveyard shift, the kitchen staff preparing for the breakfast rush, the maintenance crew in the boiler room. For the first time, someone from the 50th floor was asking them their names, asking for their opinions. At first, they were hesitant. They were used to being invisible, too. But Maria's quiet empathy was a key that unlocked their trust. She had been one of them. She understood. And so, the stories began to pour out. She learned of rampant waste in the marketing department, where thousands of dollars in high-end catering were ordered for meetings that were often canceled. She learned of a brilliant young programmer in IT who was on the verge of quitting because his manager consistently stole his ideas and presented them as his own. She discovered that the entire third-floor sales team was deeply demoralized, not because of their quotas, but because their heating and air conditioning had been broken for 6 months, and no one in facilities would take their complaints seriously. These were not the grand, billion-dollar deceptions of Julian Thorne. They were small betrayals. 1,000 tiny cuts that were slowly bleeding the company's morale dry. They were the pretending patterns Lily had spoken of, a culture that pretended to value its employees while treating them as disposable. Every evening, Maria would meet with Mr. Harrison. She wouldn't present data or charts. She would simply tell him what she had seen and heard. She told him about Walter, the night guard, who had figured out a way to reschedule the cleaning crews to save thousands on overtime, but had been told by his supervisor to just do your job. She told him about Sarah in the mailroom, a single mother who had a revolutionary idea for streamlining deliveries but had no one to tell it to. For Harrison, these sessions were a revelation and an agony. He was the captain of a ship, and he was only just now realizing how much of his crew had been suffering in silence, how much of his ship was riddled with rot he had never bothered to look for. The news about Julian Thorne, meanwhile, had hit the financial press. Thorne, cornered and furious, did not go quietly. He began to leak information to a notoriously aggressive journalist, half-truths and twisted data, all designed to paint Harrison as an incompetent, out-of-touch leader who had fired his star CFO in a fit of pique. The story he spun was that Harrison had single-handedly destroyed a brilliant deal that would have saved the company. Harrison Industries stock began to tremble, then to fall. The board of directors, already shaken, began to panic. Bancroft, the director who had been most skeptical of Maria, started making calls, rallying support to have Harrison removed. The company, it seemed, had survived the disease of Thorne's fraud only to be threatened by the cure. The breaking point came a week later. The stock had dropped by 20%. Bancroft formally called for a vote of no confidence in Arthur Harrison's leadership. An emergency board meeting was called. It was the same room, the same table. But this time, Harrison wasn't fighting a viper in his own house. He was fighting for the very soul of the company his grandfather had built. He entered the boardroom to find the directors assembled, their faces grim. Bancroft was at the opposite end of the table, his expression one of cold triumph. "Arthur," Bancroft began without preamble, "this is a disaster. Your rash actions have cost our shareholders millions. You fired our most effective executive and replaced him, it seems, with the cleaning lady. The market has lost faith in you. The board has lost faith in you." Harrison stood at the head of the table, calm and resolute. "The market is reacting to lies, Julian's final act of poison. And what you call faith, I call willful blindness. We were rotting from the inside out, and none of you, myself included, wanted to look closely enough to see it. Rhetoric won't save the stock price," Bancroft sneered. "We need a leader who can restore confidence. We need to undo the damage you've done." Harrison let the statement hang in the air. "You are right," he said, surprising them all. "We do need to restore confidence. But not by going back to the way things were. We need to build something new, something stronger, something real." He paused, then looked toward the door. "And I want to show you how." He nodded to his assistant, Clara, who opened the door. Maria walked in. A wave of shock and anger went through the room. "What is the meaning of this?" Bancroft demanded, rising from his chair. "This is a closed meeting of the board." "Sit down, Bancroft," Harrison said, his voice quiet but commanding. "Mrs. Flores is my advisor, and today, she is going to advise all of you." Maria's heart was pounding. She had never been so terrified in her life. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to become invisible again. But then she thought of Lily and of the trust Mr. Harrison had placed in her. She walked to the center of the room, clutching a simple notebook to her chest. "Mr. Harrison, members of the board," she began, her voice a soft tremor. "I am not an expert in finance. I cannot tell you about stock prices or market synergy. But for 12 years, I have worked in this building. And I can tell you about this company." She opened her notebook. "I can tell you about the third floor, where the sales team wears their coats at their desks in the winter and has lost 3 of its best people in the last year not to competitors, but to pneumonia. I can tell you about the cafeteria, where the staff has been asking for a new dishwasher for 2 years, and whose manager pays for repairs out of her own pocket so her team can get home at a decent hour." She turned a page, her voice growing stronger with every word, every story she gave a voice to. "I can tell you about the research and development department, a place filled with brilliant minds who are so afraid of their budget being cut that they hide their most innovative projects for fear of failure. They are afraid to take risks. A company that is afraid to take risks is a company that is dying." She looked up from her notebook, her eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "You see a stock price falling. I see a foundation that has been crumbling for years. Mr. Thorne's formula, it wasn't the cause of our problem. It was a symptom of it. It came from a culture where numbers on a screen mattered more than the people in the rooms, where looking good was more important than being good. You want to restore confidence? You have to restore the foundation first. You have to show the people who work here that they are seen, that they matter. She closed her notebook. The room was utterly silent. Bancroft sat frozen, his mouth slightly agape. Maria had not used a single piece of financial jargon. She had not presented a single chart. She had simply held up a mirror, and for the first time, the board was forced to see the unvarnished truth of the company they were meant to lead. An elderly director named Edna Morrison, who had been on the board for 40 years and had started her career as a secretary in the typing pool, slowly began to clap. It was a soft, rhythmic sound in the stunned silence. Then another director joined in, and another. Bancroft looked around, his face a mask of disbelief. He had lost. The vote of no confidence was never even called. Maria's simple, profound truth had won the day. In the months that followed, everything changed. Guided by Maria's insights, Harrison began a radical overhaul. He didn't just fire corrupt executives. He started from the ground up. He fixed the heating on the third floor. He bought a new dishwasher for the cafeteria. He created a new anonymous innovation fund that allowed employees to submit and get funding for risky projects, celebrating failure as a necessary part of growth. He started holding weekly town hall meetings, where he and Maria would stand together and simply listen to anyone who wanted to speak. The culture of fear began to recede, replaced by a tentative, then growing, sense of trust and shared purpose. The forensic audit provided the district attorney with a mountain of evidence against Julian Thorne. He was arrested in a quiet, unceremonious fashion, his name becoming a cautionary tale whispered in the hallways he once strode through like a king. The stock price didn't recover overnight. It was a long, slow climb, but it was built on something real this time, not on a pretending pattern. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after that fateful night, Mr. Harrison walked into Maria's office. It was no longer a sterile, temporary space. The walls were covered in photos of employees, flowcharts of new, more efficient processes sketched out by hand, and a large, colorful drawing. Lily was there, sitting at a small desk in the corner, a textbook open in front of her. She was now 11, and a quiet confidence had settled over her. Her scholarship was in place, and she was already taking advanced placement classes, her mind soaring. Mr. Harrison smiled and walked over to the drawing on the wall. It was a picture of a great, sprawling oak tree. The roots were labeled Truth and Courage. The trunk was Harrison Industries, and every leaf bore the name of an employee, from the mailroom to the boardroom. Tending to the roots were two small figures, a woman with dark hair and a little girl. She captured it perfectly, he said softly. Maria came and stood beside him, looking at her daughter's drawing. She sees the patterns in things, Maria said with a proud smile. She does, Harrison agreed. And you, Maria, you taught us all how to see the people. I thought I was in the business of building things. Buildings, products, a legacy. He looked out the window at the city below. But I was wrong. We're in the business of people. That's the only formula that really matters in the end. Maria looked at her daughter, so focused and full of limitless potential. She looked at this good, decent man who had been humble enough to listen to a whisper from the shadows. And she looked at the company, her company, that had been saved not by power or by money, but by a mother's faith and a child's brave, quiet truth. The foundation was strong again, and this time, it was built to last. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.